Hello, everybody. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's ECM, and it is the 26th of February, 2025. I feel like every day I come on here now, and I know so many of you relied on me for so many years to talk you off a ledge. And I'm going to do a little bit of that today because it's not as bad as it looks. But what passed the House last night is awful. And it's not anywhere near a done deal. So, I don't want anybody kind of like losing it quite yet, but we have an enormous amount of work to do to make sure that it doesn't become reality. And we've all really got to just face down exactly what happened. So we're going to talk through all of that and more. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I am wearing a gray ribbed sweater. My hair is pulled back. I have my thick gold hoops in. I'm a pink skin, green-eyed, dirty blonde-haired woman, and I'm sitting in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart and the big cushy chair behind me. And I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay, so here's what happened. Late last night, after a really strange series of events where it looked like the vote was going to be called off altogether, the House GOP passed the first stage of a budget resolution to fund the federal government. And it was a straight party line vote, 215 to 217. The Democrats held every vote together. And that included by having a representative who just gave birth a month ago fly across the country with her newborn so that she didn't miss the vote. It was that close. And there were indications up until the very last minute that the Republicans did not have the votes. They actually had to flip two of their own people who were planning on voting no in order to get it passed. So essentially what this budget resolution contains is a frickin' nightmare that provides $4.5 trillion in tax cuts to the wealthy, that would add do I have this right? I wrote this all down in my notes, that would add an enormous amount to the federal deficit, $2 billion to the federal deficit as a result, and demands $880 billion in cuts from government services. Now, the really bad news about this is that the place where they plan to find that money is in the initial stages from Medicaid and SNAP benefits and possibly Medicare. So it instructs the committee that is responsible for overseeing Medicaid, Medicare, and SNAP to find an enormous amount of cuts. And the only way that they can do this is essentially by kicking about 40% of the people who are on Medicaid off of it. Reminder, Medicaid provides medical care to the poorest Americans, okay, to disabled people. It is responsible for 40% of the births in the United States. Okay. And so one of the things to be very aware of here is that they're literally talking about taking millions of the poorest people in this country, the most vulnerable people in this country, off of healthcare so that they can give enormous tax breaks to billionaires and already wealthy people. Again, this is a draft, this is not final, but I want to be very honest with you. What's being proposed is really scary. They're also talking about taking SNAP benefits down. This is unfathomable to me. So SNAP benefits, for those of you who don't know, are food stamps. And they are essentially going to take them down, or trying to take them down, to cover only $1.60 per person per meal. I mean, explain to me how you're going to feed people on that amount of money. It's impossible in this economy. Like, impossible. Okay? So these cuts, as they stand right now, are profoundly dangerous. And given that the overhaul is by committee, it's possible that Medicare itself could also be touched. It is really important right now to get deeply invested in making a difference and making your voices heard. So let me explain how this works. This is only the first step to budget reconciliation. The Senate has passed a similar measure, but it has some very significant differences. While the Senate measure, I want to get this right, while the Senate measure calls for smaller Medicaid cuts, it also does something very significant, which is that it doesn't give all those tax breaks to the wealthy. So budget reconciliation can't pass until the House and the Senate are on the same page. Okay. And one of the things that this requires, particularly if it relates to taxes, is that there has to be argument in committees and various resolutions put forward about how this will be addressed. Nothing is final until everything is agreed to by both the House and the Senate. So what this means is that we have to be as loud as humanly possible to our reps, whether they are red or whether they are blue, about how we feel about this. I strongly suggest, if you are represented by Democrats right now, that you make phone calls to the Hill today, thanking your representative for standing together with Democrats and voting this down. You should also make it very clear to them how you feel about the prospect of Medicaid, Medicare, and food stamps being cut, so that they know that you're behind them, that you support them, you are grateful for what they've done. That may be as important, by the way, given the possibility of a government shutdown. It may be as important to thank the people who are doing the right thing as it is to challenge the people who are doing the wrong thing. If you are represented by red people, Republicans, you should call those people today and give them a piece of your mind. Tell them that nobody voted for the poorest Americans to lose their health care. Nobody voted for people on food stamps to starve. Nobody voted for this. So that people who are already super rich can get enormous tax breaks, hundreds of thousands of dollars of tax breaks every year. Nobody voted for this. And I think it's really important that we are loud, and literally that you call every day right now, because between now and the beginning of March, first couple of weeks in March, this is front and center, okay? And there are multiple stages that this has to go through, right? It has to go through attempts in committee to reach a resolution here between the House and the Senate. It may have to go back to specific committees inside the House and inside the Senate. Then it comes up to the floor. There's a whole period of debate. Then there is a final floor vote in both houses. So there are multiple stages for intervention here, okay? But primarily, first and foremost, you got to make your phone calls. The second thing that I want to suggest to people is that you show up at town halls, okay? Now, I know we talked yesterday, and we've talked quite a bit in recent days about what's been happening at the town halls for Republicans when they're at home, okay? We have some people in our Patreon committee who are going to town halls for their representatives in the next couple of days. If your Republican representative is holding a town hall, you need to show up. And beyond that, you need to actually show up and tell your representative how you feel about this. You can protest if you want, but I'm going to tell you that I think the more effective method here is to ask questions in the town hall about why they are cutting benefits to the poorest Americans, why they are cutting benefits to give tax breaks to the wealthy, why they are cutting benefits so that we can add to the federal deficit. Really make your voice heard on this. And you don't have to be rude. You don't have to do something that's going to get you arrested, but you do have to show up and make your voice heard. In part because if GOP reps don't feel the pressure on this, they will have no reason to get off the fence and change their position, okay? And again, this is a very slim margin in the House right now. They're going to have to take another full vote to pass it in the final version. We only need to move a couple people off the dime in order for this whole thing to go down in flames. And frankly, I think at this point, the importance of trying to use nonviolent means of making our voices heard is more important than it has been, save a few very critical turning points in American history. Because the impact that this is going to cause to literally every community and every system in America cannot be overstated, right? You lose Medicare, you lose hospital systems. You lose Medicaid, you lose hospital systems and healthcare because people don't get paid for providing healthcare. Okay, whole communities are going to lose access to doctors and hospitals and nurse practitioners. And then think about what happens when people get sick, right? Think about what this means if people can't afford their prescriptions or their medical coverage. Okay, the impact to this is going to be essentially nationwide. And it is one of those moments where, just like when they tried to repeal the ACA during Trump's first term, we've literally got to bring everything to bear here. So I want to encourage everyone to make your voices heard, first of all, by making your phone calls every single day. If you have a Republican rep who's hosting a town hall soon, you got to show up and make your voice heard. No question about it. And I'm sure that organizations like ADAPT, which is a disabled direct action organization, will be engaging in some form of direct action soon. You will all remember that they did the sit-down strikes in McConnell's office and elsewhere on the Hill, where literally people were pulled out of their wheelchairs and arrested during the first Trump administration when the ACA was trying to be overturned. I'm sure we will see other things like that. But for the moment, the thing that I just want to recommend right now is that you have to call your reps. You have to call your senators. Like, there is no other way out, okay? And I'm very, very worried about what this is going to mean. Like, you take away SNAP benefits from the poorest Americans, people will literally starve to death. Like, that's what they're willing to do. They're literally willing to starve poor kids in America, right? Take the poorest people off necessary health care in order to give billionaires tax breaks. That's what it's all about. So one thing that I just want to make very clear here. So somebody's asking a question about, like, why don't they already know about the damage they're doing? So it's not that they don't know about the damage they're doing. The problem is they're not feeling pressure, right? If they do not feel the pressure from their own constituencies, they will not move. And I know that there are some GOP reps out there who are refusing to hold town halls for this exact reason. They don't want to have to confront the damage that they're doing, but they don't get to make that choice, right? Part of this is about what we do, like we the people do. We have to make our voices heard in collective forms of action, all right? And I think people should be absolutely lighting up the Capitol Hill switchboard. Like, flood their offices with calls. I don't care if their voicemail boxes are full, keep trying. Call local offices, not just the headquarters offices in DC, okay? You've got to consider every possible route right now from a nonviolent resistance standpoint to make sure that you are getting through to the people who are making decisions right now about the future of the poorest people in this country. Like, it's a really big deal. And our seniors and disabled people. I mean, the things that they are trying to do here are about as amoral as it gets, right? Starve poor families to give billionaires tax breaks. I mean, I don't even know. I don't know how you sleep at night, but that's not my issue, right? My issue is, like, how are we going to save people? Because literally it's going to come down to, like, whether or not they actually feel the pressure. So I just want to remind everybody that, you know, this is an extremely high stakes game. And we won previously on the ACA. You all will remember John McCain being the one vote that did the down thumb on this during the first administration. It may come down to that floor vote, right? But the point here is that it literally took activists speaking directly to representatives and senators and directly reaching John McCain in that instance in order to save the ACA. So it's that kind of telling your stories, telling why it matters to you, reaching out to people and saying, these are the people in my community who are affected. These are the people in my family who are affected. I'm affected if you do this. Are you willing to let me die? Are you willing to let my loved ones suffer and die? Are you willing to make sure that my entire community loses their hospital? Is that what you're okay with? So the people like Elon Musk, who has more money than he could ever spend in a single lifetime, gets more tax breaks? You're okay with that? Like, that's the kind of messaging that needs to go forward. And, you know, again, if your GOP rep is not holding town halls, you need to find alternative methods. Show up at their local office and tell the staff. Because something that people don't realize here is, in addition to the fact that calls are tracked, there are meetings inside every representative's office every week where they talk about what they're hearing from constituents. Every senator's office where they talk about what they're hearing from their constituents. You can find creative ways to message, right? We talked about this like years ago during similar battles. You can show up at a local, office with like balloons, right? And say, I'm dropping off these balloons. Here's 10 balloons for the 10 people in my community I know who are going to lose their health care if you pass this budget, right? You have to come up with creative ways to make yourself recognized and seen, all right? And I really want people to step up, right? Indivisible was really effective at organizing this in the prior term, real direct action campaigns. They've been talking about this for the last couple of weeks, by the way. Showing up at your senator's offices was one thing they were recommending with regard to nominations in particular. It's really important right now that if you're not comfortable doing this alone in terms of like showing up and making your voice heard, that you get involved with local chapters of organizations like Indivisible and Red, Wine, and Blue, Moms Demand, other organizations that are doing really incredible mobilization work right now for direct action at offices, okay? Super, super, super critical, all right? Again, it is by telling your own stories about how you were impacted that we move people's opinions. All right. I have a couple of other things that I just need to discuss today. Trump made a statement yesterday that he was going to offer gold immigration cards to foreign investors. Now, this is not something that he can do by executive order, so we're going to have to wait and see how this all plays out. But essentially what he was suggesting was that permanent residency cards would be for sale inside the United States for $5 million. And in the context of bringing this up, he made comments about how he knew some Russian oligarchs who were really good guys. And yes, all of that is horrifying in its own way, because it is a part of the whole thing of like, not okay with brown immigrants, but fine with white wealthy immigrants who are going to essentially put money into his coffers in order to secure permanent residency inside the United States. I'm not convinced this is a done deal. I'm not convinced that this isn't just like another shiny object while the budget is doing what it's doing. So I don't want anybody losing their minds over this. But by the way, like, immigration rights is a matter of legislation. So essentially, he would have to make sure that there was a bill passed through the House and the Senate signed by him in order to get this done. He may try to do it by EO. I think there would probably be litigation filed about it almost immediately. But I don't want anybody to think that that's something that like is in the immediate offing. Okay, we had some very interesting developments yesterday in court, including the conversion of a temporary restraining order into a permanent injunction by Judge Ali Khan. And this relates to the spending freeze cuts, where essentially a TRO had been entered saying you can't arbitrarily freeze all government spending. And she wrote a scathing opinion about the fact that the original spending freeze EO was improvident, ill-conceived, harmful, and that she was converting it into a long-term injunction that presumably will now be challenged on appeal, but that nonetheless really essentially referred to the fact that DOJ and the EO were acting far outside the boundaries of what they were legally allowed to do. The opinion itself is incredibly well reasoned. I read it last night. It does really hold the government's feet to the fire in terms of the potential damage that could be done by just arbitrarily cutting off spending in all regards. We're going to have to see what happens next. I want to make it really clear that this is not an enforcement provision. Okay, so when you file for injunctive relief, there are stages that you can pursue. A temporary restraining order is when there is emergency relief needed to prevent irreparable harm, okay? Meaning like you don't stop it now, harm's going to take place that can't be repaired, okay? So sometimes you get that, sometimes you don't, but the TRO was what was granted. A preliminary injunction is the next stage from that. And that is a much longer term form of relief that says you can't do this for as long as I say you can't, okay? Now, again, it will be appealed. It will be challenged. Late last night, it was challenged almost immediately because basically, the Trump administration filed something saying this means we'd have to release $2 billion in funds tomorrow. Well, you already had a TRO in place for the last 2 weeks that said you weren't supposed to be freezing any spending. So why were you not ready to actually release anything? Why haven't you released it already? Is a very good question that I imagine the judge is going to be asking. But all that said, there isn't supposed to be any more government freezes. And so now the question of enforcement comes up, because if they continue to violate what is now a preliminary injunction, that's where criminal contempt, reminder, it's a misnomer because it's actually a civil penalty. That's when criminal contempt comes into play, which can include, by the way, arguably 6 months of jail time for whomever is responsible for releasing those funds who doesn't do it. So again, that has to be requested by the plaintiffs in that case. They have to request enforcement, all right? But they can do that pretty much immediately if the funds continue to be frozen. So again, there's a lot of moving pieces right now. I'm going to remind everybody that there's 20 plus TROs on various issues that are pending right now, from cases that have been filed with regard to EOs and other actions taken by DOJ. So many, many, many moving pieces. Just Security has a litigation tracker, which you can Google if you want to see where any of these things are right now in the general scheme of things. But that ruling is very strong and very strongly worded, and essentially really shows that what they were doing was arbitrary and capricious and not well thought out and shouldn't ever be in play again. So again, we shall see what the next stages of this bring. Okay, so really, that's it for today. There are a lot of other questions on the Patreon feed, but I want to focus on this budget thing because I just really want to really empower and embolden you all to go take action on this today. Like, please make your phone calls. If you're represented by Democrats, call them and thank them for sticking together in the House. If you're represented by Democrats in the Senate, call them and tell them that they have to vote down any budget that includes cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, or SNAP. All right? So important. Like, so important to tell them to stick together and vote it down. I do have to tell you all that if they manage to pull this off, unfortunately, there is no filibuster in the Senate for the reconciliation process. So we've got to stop this at one of the many other stages at which this is going to go, or flip some votes in order to prevent it. All right. There's not going to be an opportunity for one Democrat to stand up and say, no, I'm going to filibuster this, and therefore it can't ever make it to the floor. Reconciliation for a budgeting, unfortunately, doesn't work like that. So we have to really be loud. And please, I just beg you, I know people are like, my rep never listens to me. He's GOP. My senator never listens to me. She's GOP. You have to call anyway. Like, you need to make them work for the horror and the harm that they're trying to perpetrate on poor people. Like, it's just so mandatory. And seniors and, people who are starving. Like, please, please, please make your calls. Okay. And don't hesitate to show up at a town hall. I mean, it's again, the town halls are getting a lot of really important news coverage right now. I don't want to discount the impact of that on greater resistance-based movements. So please show up and do that as well. All right. That's it for today, my friends. I will be back here tomorrow, regular time. Thanks for being here. Thanks for making your calls. Please don't forget to like this broadcast, thumbs up it, subscribe if you haven't already, comment if you're watching on the replay, because it tells the algorithm that you like what we're doing here, and that gets this information out to more people. All right. It is not hopeless. Like, they really did try to tank the ACA back in 2018, and we won that. So, again, this is about remembering that there is power to the people. There's way more of us than there are of them. Reminder, 90 million people didn't vote in 2024. Like, we have a lot of people on our side of the fence who can really change the direction that this is all going. But we can't do it unless we actually come together, organize, and make our voices heard. So please do that. All right. Lots of love, everybody. I'll see you here tomorrow, regular time. Take care. Bye.